The graphical leap into the early 2000s generation of gaming was like going from medium to hard mode in Guitar Hero. Sure, going from hard to expert may have added more notes to make the game harder, but hard mode is the one that added the tricky orange button. As the PlayStation 2 was entering its early stages, many gamers, including myself, were absolutely dying to see what the system was truly capable of. Although it didn't come out as a launch title, the Bouncer did come out within the first year of the system's life cycle. Just looking at the gameplay footage, it wasn't hard to see what the hype was about. On top of being put out by Square Enix, who was still called Squaresoft at the time, of course, and Dream Factory, the game simply looked incredible, from the smooth cutscenes to the impressive gameplay and impressive technology being shown off, which we'll be touching on more later. The footage made it look like you were taking the FMV cutscenes from the PS1 era Final Fantasies and actually getting to play them. I mean, who wouldn't be hyped for that? After multiple delays, and unfortunately removal of the destructible environments that were originally planned, the game finally launched on March 6, 2001, here in the US, receiving mostly average to negative review scores followed by some disappointing sales figures. Was it a case of too much hype leading to inevitable disappointment? Or was the game really that bad? Strap in, and let's take a look. Back when the Bouncer first came out, I did not yet have a PS2. I was also having a hard time deciding what would be the first game I went with. Spoiler alert, it was Zone of Enders. Who could resist the call of the Metal Gear Solid 2 demo? Also, Zone of Enders was fun. The Bouncer ended up being a Blockbuster video rental for me later on. At the time, I remembered enjoying it even though I was heavily confused by the game's structure. I also didn't remember much about the gameplay other than it being a 3D brawler and my having some difficulty with aiming my character's hits in the beginning, so I knew it was time for a revisit. Well, it turns out I remembered some details correctly, but there's so much more to this. Let's take it from the top. Despite being a Squaresoft title, this game is not a JRPG, though it does have some elements of one. No, this is actually a 3D beat-em-up title, with cutscenes in between each scenario. You can choose to play as one of three characters. Sion, a guy who looks like Sora from Kingdom Hearts in the future. Volt, a guy who looks like Zell from Final Fantasy VIII in the future, with a hilarious, albeit nonsensical anti-cactar leather coat. And Ko, who looks like Laguna from Final Fantasy VIII. Yes, if you couldn't tell, all of the characters in this game were designed by none other than Tetsuya Nomura himself, artist and character designer of many Final Fantasy games and other JRPG favorites. But this is not a Final Fantasy game, and what you're in for here has never quite been replicated again. A large portion of the game actually consists of cutscenes that are used to tell the game's story. Near the end of each scene, you're given the choice of which of the three bouncers you'll play as, and off you go. Some stages will involve fighting as low as 2 or 3 enemies, while others will have you crossing over multiple sections and rooms, filled with enemies, though those are far less frequent. After each stage or boss fight, you're given bouncer points, and the ability to spend them on increases in life, power, defense, or to unlock new special moves. This is the RPG element I was referring to before. After this, it's on to the next cutscene, and the cycle continues. The game's story is completely ridiculous, and I'm sure other channels have done more in-depth analysis on it already, but here's the quick version. The three bouncers work at a bar called Fate. Sion's friend Dominique gets kidnapped by people. You follow the trail by beating people up and eventually find out it's all part of a large-scale operation by a guy named Duragon to control the world with a satellite, with Dominique as the key, who is actually an android created in the likeness of Duragon's sister, who previously died of unfortunate circumstances. You fight people to get to him, encounter other figures from your character's pasts, and defeat Duragon in order to save Dominique and the world. Jeez, I'd hate to hear the longer version of that. The fighting consists of light and hard attacks, but instead of being designated to different buttons, the attacks are determined by the sensitivity of your button presses. Hard presses for the hard attacks, and light presses for the light attacks. It takes some getting used to. Heck, I didn't even understand that was how it worked until my second playthrough. You also have a guard button, which you'll become very familiar with as the game's difficulty begins to ramp up. Your character can walk and run in any direction, and automatically enter a fighting stance when close enough to an enemy. There's also a Trinity attack that each character can use while fighting enemies or bosses, when one of your partners makes a taunt at an enemy, and if you quickly hit the R2 button, you'll activate it. These attacks are flashy and look cool, but for some reason they actually do less damage than most of your regular attacks. Oh, and don't even bother trying to use it on Duragon unless you just want more funny cinematics. As you continue to fight and gain new stats and abilities, your rank increases, which is slightly similar to leveling up, with S being the highest you can go. Each playthrough will likely take you less than 2 hours to finish, and even less than that if you skip all the cutscenes, but the game has multiple endings, 7 to be exact, all with different requirements for getting to the end. With this and multiple characters to play as and level up on top of the endings, this all leaves you with plenty to do, even if the differences to the story aren't always that large. The voice acting was surprisingly good in my opinion, especially for its time. Keep in mind that Final Fantasy X did not yet exist, and voice acting in a Squaresoft game was no common event. Each character was serviceable, and played out their parts well enough that it never took you out of the experience. Every time that you die, instead of simply allowing you to retry whatever sequence you lost at, the game takes you right back to the opening cutscene and main menu. This makes some sections absolutely frustrating to replay, forcing you to reload your save file and skip all of the cutscenes leading up to the fight. The gameplay is also a mixed bag. A lot of attacks have a very poor reach and won't connect if you're not extremely close to the enemy as it is. The automatic fighting stance is also an issue when you're surrounded by more than one enemy, as your character will continually turn to face whoever is closest to them. This leaves your back exposed by the other enemy, whose attack you won't be able to stop, even with the block button being held. Your teammates are somewhat helpful at times, but extremely unhelpful at others. I lost track of how many times a boss would grab me or start kicking my butt, only for the other two guys to just stand there and do literally nothing while I had my face acquainted with the pavement. The camera is also pretty poor, especially during sequences where you have to run down hallways or fight in close quarters. There's no real way to control it, and I actually found myself getting hit by enemies I couldn't even see because of it. Probably the most frustrating and unlucky situation is getting caught in an attack that already hit another teammate of yours. If the teammate flies toward you after being hit, it will also hit you, sometimes even if you block, and cause an almost comically high amount of damage. Avoiding these hits are borderline luck-based and are sure to cause some aggravation. The final boss, Duragon, is also at SNK final boss syndrome levels of ridiculousness in how powerful he is. After you reach him on your third playthrough, you find out that the second part wasn't even his final form. Yes, this character has the magical ability to take off an article of clothing and somehow get more powerful from it. I have no idea what happened here, but by this point I was laughing too hard to even care. The game runs at a surprisingly smooth frame rate, helping it look nice even by today's gaming standards. You will notice that the visuals appear slightly blurry and jagged. This motion blur effect was used as a form of anti-aliasing to keep things looking smooth. The visual flaws are much more prominent on an HD TV, but if you play this on an older CRT TV, as it was originally intended for, then it looks just fine. The soundtrack is also a lot of fun, with music that suits the setting and gameplay quite well. As you can see, it's an interesting experiment for sure, and one that you may want to check out or rent, just for the sheer uniqueness of it all. But it's going to turn more people off than it's going to please. Even taking out the issue of having to reload a save every time you lose, the gameplay is very clunky and really could have used more polish before hitting the stands, but I'm sure that was impossible considering how much pressure there was just to get it out in the first place. Brawlers of this style, whether 2D or 3D, usually don't have much in the way of cutscenes. The story simply plays out in front of you and you mow your way through enemies to get to boss fights and call it a stage. A lot of people feel that the barrage of cutscenes disrupts that flow, making the game's momentum come to a grinding halt. The game could have benefited from a co-op mode as well for the full brawler effect, but I could understand them not having the time or the resources by this point. It would have been nice to see in a sequel, but alas. Luckily, story mode is not the only way to play this game. There's also a surprisingly fun versus mode, where you and up to 4 people can duel it out in one big free-for-all, or fight computer-generated opponents. There's also a survival mode, where you can take any unlocked character and have them run through stages of enemies for a high score, and a chance to unlock the Black Hooded Scion. Although survival mode didn't grip me as much as the versus mode did, I was at least happy that the game gave you more things to do. These modes also give you the incentive to play through the story multiple times in order to unlock all of the bonus characters. The game is actually at its best after your characters are ranked up. Once you've gotten all the upgrades and abilities, I feel that the difficulty is far more understanding and proportionate. It's just a shame that it takes so long to get to this point, and I can't say I blame people for not wanting to stick with it until then. If my opinions on this game sound very mixed, that's because, well, they are. There are so many design flaws here that it's almost impossible to make it sound good on paper. The cutscene to gameplay ratio is ridiculous, and yet I kept going anyway. I think that this game was at least a fascinating experiment that we unfortunately may never get to see fleshed out again. But hey, it looks cool. So to sum it all up, yes, this game is trash. But it's my trash. There's almost nothing I can do to logically defend this game or its setup, and yet, here we are, with me still playing it, even if I have no idea why. This game certainly did not live up to the hype, but there were still some factors I enjoyed, and for the $4 I paid for it used, it's hard to complain too much. Rent it, or get it for less than $10 if you can. And that's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you've ever played the game before yourself, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you all next time.